me now? Good, I'm glad to hear it. My name is Rainey Reitman. I am one of the founders and steering committee members of the Bradley Manning Support Network.
Woo!
When we got started, we were literally just 15 people who didn't know each other, who connected on a website and said, we've got to do something about Bradley Manning. People need to hear his story. People need to understand that this guy's in prison. And at the time, there were really not very many news stories about him at all. And we didn't have anybody like Courage to Resist. And we didn't really have any kind of particular structure. And we didn't have a bank account. I look back at those days and I am just filled with incredible wonderment that today we have 70 different protests in 70 cities all over the world, that we have managed to do fundraising to cover all of Brad's legal expenses up until now. One of the tactics that the United States government is using to deal with the quote-unquote Bradley Manning problem is pushing his trial off again and again and again and again. Every time they do that, they hope, well, maybe this time the American public won't notice. Maybe it won't hit the newsstands. Maybe journalists won't cover the issue. And perhaps we won't be able to fundraise to continue to cover the exorbitant legal costs that we're trying to pull together so that Brad's family doesn't have to mortgage their home in order to make sure that he has top-notch legal counsel throughout this entire trial. And I have been so impressed that even though we are a couple years into this battle, we're still able to energize and engage people all over the world to show up to events like this and to continue to promise and pledge to make sure that we'll be able to ensure that we have enough funding to make sure that Brad has complete legal costs covered as he moves forward into this trial. So thank you guys for coming here today about that.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I'm sure Jeff and others will have other things to say, but I'm sorry, I'll talk a little louder, lady and cat. But I do want to say that up until now, we have been trying to do coverage of Manning's pretrial hearings in our website, bradleymanning.org. And you might think, well, why do we need to do this coverage of the pretrial hearings? It's in these pretrial hearings that it is decided who is going to be allowed to be presented as a witness during the court-martial, what kind of evidence will be allowed to be presented, what kind of arguments will be allowed to be made during the actual court-martial. So even though Brad hasn't gone to court yet, and even though he hasn't technically had his trial, he's had a series of administrative pre-trial hearings. And in each of these hearings, the defense has argued to ensure that evidence that shows that Bradley Manning was acting out of his conscience, that the proof that Manning was making decisions in order to bring the general public more information about how their government is operating and to blow the whistle on war crimes can be submitted in the court-martial itself. And what we have found is it's been a very difficult and frustrating legal battle. We've had a few wins, we've had a few losses. You can find out about some of those on our website. But in particular, whether or not we're able to go to court and argue that, yes, Bradley was acting out of his conscience, and yes, that should affect both how he has found guilty or not guilty in the quote-unquote aiding the enemy charges, and that should be able to affect whether or not he has certain sentences, is something that we're actually going to fight and decide in large part before he ever walks into a courtroom for his court-martial. And that's why it's so important that we ensure that there are journalists covering these pretrial hearings, that they aren't just swept under the rug and ignored until the actual court-martial date. Because by the time the court-martial rolls around, it'll be too late. Now is when we really need public attention on the issue. The only other things I kind of wanted to say are, again, you can find us on bradleymanning.org. I really encourage you guys to get involved with the organization now. We have a great need to do public awareness now. It's so important, not only for Bradley Manning, but for every whistleblower that comes in the future, post-Bradley Manning, that they know that if you're willing to stand up and speak the truth about the United States government and expose war crimes such as the treatment of prisoners in Guantanamo, the shooting of journalists, as we saw in Collateral Murder, and the imperialism of the United States government, which was shown so clearly by the various tables that were released. If you're willing to do that, there will be a worldwide outcry for your support, and we will all work hard to ensure that you don't waste away in prison without a fair trial and without adequate public support. So please, please get involved. Visit the website, friend us on Facebook, and please consider a donation. Thank you.